Pteridospermis aurelis, Neuropterus gigantea, Barypterus gigantea. It seems if you repeat this 3 times on a moonlit night, you can summon the devil. Well, or at least a succubus. Actually, these are just the names of prehistoric ferns, the very ones we found in large quantities during our recent expedition to the Donetsk coal basin. Paleontologist scientists date the existence of these ferns to 300 million years ago. However, something caused our group to have doubts, particularly the green color of the samples we found. It's amazing that none of the paleontologists have mentioned this until now. And looking straight at the green leaves, they said that their color has nothing to do with plants. Hello, you are on the Age of Skepticism channel with Mikhail Kalmykov. Today, thanks to a prehistoric fern, we will find answers to several mysteries at once. At minimum, new theories will surface. So, let's get straight to the point. After our expedition, 2 or 3 months passed, and the samples with green plants began to decompose, just as a green leaf is supposed to. In some places they turned yellow, in others red, and somewhere they completely crumbled into dust, leaving only imprints in the coal. And now it finally became clear why neither I nor Sklerov had ever heard from paleontologists about green plants in coal before. It's no secret that samples collected during expeditions often wait for their researchers for years, gathering dust in boxes. Sometimes they even wait for decades. And why go far for examples? The paleontologists themselves talk about this. Of course, during this time, all organic matter decomposes. And after the specialists get to the sample, what they can see, besides the imprint, that's not a threat to us. First of all, we've already shot the necessary material. Secondly, everyone who could has already accused me of embellishing. Well, thirdly, we know where there's plenty of this stuff. We can go there once or twice more if necessary. It's not an issue. And now suddenly we change the course of the story and head to the ancient Incas. Each of us has at least once heard about El Dorado, the mysterious golden city of the ancient Inca Empire. A city where literally everything was made of gold. The walls of houses, decorations, clothes, and even the roads were covered in gold. No one has found this city to this day. However, the legend had a real basis. The conquistadors who arrived in South America after Columbus discovered immense reserves of gold there. Well, for example, in 1532, the last Inca chief, Atahualpa, was captured by the conquistadors. Francisco Pizarro and his fellow conquistadors demanded a ransom for him and received 6 tons of gold and 12 tons of silver at once. For several weeks, a caravan of loaded llamas transported tons of gold and silver statues, goblets, and other valuables to the Europeans' camp. There was a lot of gold not only among the Incas, but also among the Aztecs, the Maya, and other tribes. According to the Spanish priest and historian Pedro Chiesa de Leon, in just 19 years, from 1541 to 1560, Spain alone exported as much as 500 tons of gold from America. And that's just Spain in a short period of time. Basically, there's a lot of gold in America. Almost all the tribes, in one way or another, possessed reserves of this metal and items made from it. You can remember Alaska, from which the American government, after it was transferred from Russia, extracted a fabulous amount of gold. You could talk for hours about the American gold rush, about the amount of metal exported by year, by tonnage, by tribe, and so on. 1 million articles have been written about this and thousands of films have been made. But I'm interested in a completely different question. How? How did half-naked Indians, who supposedly didn't even know about the wheel, didn't possess industrial technologies or writing, and didn't build ore processing factories, obtain gold in such quantities. Yes, of course, it was possible to simply pan for gold nuggets in streams and rivers. This method can't be dismissed, but it will never yield such an industrial scale of output. Well, just take a look. Modern gold mining in Peru is carried out using all the technological power of civilization, and now Peru ranks 6th in the world in gold production. About 158 tons of gold are mined there every year. And although no one knows how much gold the Incas mined, according to some records, using quipu deciphered by the Spaniards, it was believed that up to 217 tons of gold were delivered to Cusco every year. That is, all the modern power of civilization squeezes 158 tons of gold a year out of Peru, while some half-naked Indians manage to mine 217 tons. That's some kind of fantasy. Of course, you could say that the Spaniards mistranslated and misinterpreted the quipu, that the data was exaggerated tenfold. There is probably a logical explanation for this as well. Well, for example, the Spaniards might have exaggerated the income to get the king to sponsor new expeditions, and such an explanation would seem quite logical. But first of all, the Spaniards had other evidence of their correctness right before their eyes. That is, in fact, the gold itself in incredible quantities, statues of chiefs, also cast from gold in life size. By the way, what does life size mean? How much is that? The average volume of a human body is about 65 liters, give or take. And since gold is a very heavy metal, 1 liter of gold would weigh about 17 kilograms. So each of these statues weighed at least 1,100 kilograms, which is more than a ton of pure gold. And secondly, even if we assume that the Spaniards' numbers are underestimated by 10 times, even in that case, the annual gold production by the Incas exceeded the annual gold production of, for example, modern Turkey, Bolivia, or Venezuela. In such countries as Egypt and Iran, it's surpassed by 2 times. And all this was done using primitive methods, just simple panning in streams. Well, it's kind of hard to believe. In general, the fact is obvious. American Indians somehow managed to mine gold on a modern industrial scale at the level of the top 3 gold-producing countries without actually having their own industry. And this question interests not only me, all historians and researchers, in one way or another, have dealt with this question, this mystery. That same Andrei Sklarov-Sloy also had his own point of view on this matter. In fact, his main idea concerned metallurgy in general, its sudden appearance within all ancient civilizations. And in this, I can't argue with him. In my opinion, his conclusions made in the report Metallurgy, The Gift of the Gods, are more correct than not, but not entirely. However, in his report, he mainly touched on bronze, copper, and iron methods of smelting, and speculated on how primitive people could have obtained these technologies. As a result, he quite logically comes to the conclusion that people received the methods and technologies in a ready-made form from some other civilizations. I recommend listening to his lecture on the LAI channel. The link is in the description and in the hints. Nevertheless, he didn't really mention the methods of gold extraction. And it's not surprising because to this day, only 2 main methods are known. No, of course, there are actually many more, but only 2 are considered classic. The first is the well-known method of washing the ore through water, often by hand panning. And the second method, which is more advanced, is amalgamation. In short, the essence of amalgamation is as follows. The gold-bearing ore is crushed, mixed with mercury, lime is added, and all of this is stirred for some time while continuing to grind it. The gold in the resulting pulp gets wetted by the mercury, forming an amalgam. Then this amalgam is filtered out from the total mass and subjected to evaporation. That is, it is heated so that the mercury evaporates, leaving behind pure gold. Of course, there are other extraction methods as well, for example, using nitric acid. But in any case, all these methods require at least processing plants, some means of extraction, and crushing of the ore on an industrial scale. Mining operations, transporting thousands of tons of ore from the mining site to the production site, industrial capacities for grinding the ore into fine dust, tanks and mechanisms for continuous mixing of the ore. However, the poor Indians had none of this, not even wheels, let alone any mechanisms. And all records were kept using knotted string writing, systems of such ciphers. But the manufacturing process requires precise instructions, adherence to technology, and exact compliance with it. You can't do without writing here. Not writing won't help. That's the main mystery. Geologist William Brooks from the United States of America also wondered about this and couldn't believe that the Indians, who had so many gold items, didn't have the technology to mine this metal at the deposits. Together with his colleagues from Peru, he analyzed the residual mercury level in 7 samples of gold foil created by the local people before contact with Europeans. In all the samples, he found signs of amalgamation, that is, mercury. It seems like this is the evidence. However, his work was immediately criticized by the archaeologists themselves. In particular, Itsumi Shimada from the University of Southern Illinois explained that all the studied samples were originally covered with a crimson pigment called cinnabar, which is actually mercury sulfide. But Brooks did not accept this criticism with the following words: "But they had to somehow extract this gold. And amalgamation is the only obvious metallurgical method that is recognized worldwide." In other words, there are no other methods. That is, he literally admitted to an attempt at forgery since he saw no other possibilities. However, his method also does not answer another question. So where did the Indians get so much mercury in that case? Yes, of course, cinnabar exists in the ore. But in order to extract the necessary amount for amalgamation, you also need its industrial production and a technological process that is no less complex than gold mining. And maybe even processes that surpass it. Because it is necessary not only to crush the ore, but also to heat it to the required temperature, maintain it in this state for quite a long time, evaporating the mercury from the ore, and then collect it in a condensed form. In addition, the amalgamation process requires more mercury than gold. Such huge reserves need to be stored somewhere, but no warehouses with mercury have been found either. Nevertheless, there is evidence of mining by the indigenous people in Peru, including anthracite coal. However, it has been noted that the Inca used it only for heating their homes, even though this coal is of excellent quality and is best suited for industry and metal smelting. However, instead of this, the Inca used another type of charcoal, which was of lower quality. Why? Why? After all, there's excellent fuel right under their feet, and even the amount of metal they could have produced for some reason hasn't been found. By the most modest estimates, the Incas produced several times less metal than they should have. So where did it all go? Where is all the metal that the Incas mined? If the Incas, Aztecs, and other Indian tribes had such well-developed metallurgy, why couldn't they put up any real resistance to the conquistadors? By the way, if you watch the LAI materials filmed in Peru, you probably noticed, among other things, the mysterious Inca aqueducts, in particular in the city of Cajamarca, where, by the way, the capture of the chief Atahualpa took place, and where the Indians brought those very tons of gold as ransom. These aqueducts carved into the stone are perfect channels. They are distinguished by their very small width and depth, yet they stretch for many kilometers from the mountains to the city and beyond. But the most mysterious thing about them is the sharp 90-degree bends. The purpose of these bends is still unclear. Why put such obstacles in the path of the flow? Why is the flow so shallow? In general, there are a lot of mysteries. And one of them is why, when talking about our expedition to the Rostov region, to the coal mines, telling about the Carboniferous period in Ferns, I suddenly switched to the Incas. Well, I'll tell you now. The thing is, while examining the remains of ancient plants under a microscope, we quite unexpectedly discovered microscopic veins of gold. In some places, the gold was condensed into the tiniest droplets right inside the not yet carbonized cells of the leaf. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. It could have been anything. First of all, of course, it could have been sulfur or pyrite crystals, which are sometimes called fool's gold. However, the geologists who were part of our small team confirmed that it was indeed gold. That's when the puzzle started to come together. No, of course, the worm of doubt tormented me for many more months. Of course, I wanted to take the samples for analysis to confirm or refute the emerging hypothesis. Unfortunately, the laboratories charged 35,000 to 40,000 rubles for such an analysis, and the time frame was no less than 2 weeks. I was about to announce a fundraising campaign, not really hoping to get any results, but suddenly it turned out that everything had already been done before us. Back in the mid-19th century, there were the first reports about the gold content of coal in the United States of America. In the 20th century, studies were conducted on the gold content of coal in the Amur region in Primorye. Gold was also found in our studied Donetsk Basin. In 2017, an application was filed for patent Russia 2,681,977 C2, which was successfully published in March 2019. This patent belongs to the Amur Scientific Center of the Far Eastern branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. It contains a technology for extracting gold from brown and hard coals through an aqueous solution. In other words, the need to confirm the presence of gold in coal through expensive expert analysis disappeared on its own. Gold is indeed present in coal in microscopic quantities. However, we saw something more than just gold. We saw with our own eyes its presence inside the cells of the fern. And now remember the name of this fern, which was mentioned at the very beginning of this video. Pteridospermus aureus, that is, the golden fern. Now its name begins to take on a new meaning. It's not just a poetic name inspired by a specific color. No, this is literally a plant that contains gold, and it grew almost all over the planet. The only question is when. Since ancient times, among gold prospectors, there has been a belief that gold lies where horsetail or fern grows. Where could such a belief have come from? Could it be from the times when there was a lot of fern, and in places where there was gold, it would take on a golden color? Well, let's imagine for a second that this is actually true. Ferns and horsetails really do absorb gold from the soil and concentrate it in their stems and leaves. So how do you extract it then? Yeah, it couldn't be simpler. Make a closed furnace in which you simply burn the fern. A lot of fern until it turns to ash. And then wash this ash with water. And send it somewhere through a small man-made channel for many kilometers. Through a channel that will be full of sharp, steep turns at angles of 90 degrees and more. In places with sharp turns, small whirlpools will form in the current, mixing the contents. Thanks to this, the light ash will be washed away, while the heavier gold will settle in the places where the channel turns. A little stream. All right, scoop out the gold with a shovel. By the way, the patent I mentioned earlier basically suggests the same scheme. The only difference is that there's much less ash from coal, so the gold is extracted from the condensed steam, but also with water. And if I were in the place of ancient gold miners, I would call the substance containing gold, quite rightly, ash. It seems like now everything has fallen into place. the industrial method of gold mining by half-naked Indians, the etymology of the word ash, and myths about the gold-bearing properties of ferns. Sklyarov, in his report on Inca metallurgy, also mentions the huge number of furnaces in which it was specifically charcoal that was burned. In other words, we have two versions. The official one, which talks about millions of years of evolution and the sudden, out-of-nowhere appearance of technological processes among the Incas. And by the way, their just as sudden disappearance. Or the unofficial version, which says that the Incas simply burned tons of ferns and got gold from the ash. This appears to have been the situation worldwide prior to the disaster, similar to Russian prospectors. By the way, burning wood and ferns in furnaces could produce gold as a byproduct of metallurgy. It's a kind of waste-free production, ash. The residue left after the production of metals like bronze, instead of just being thrown away, was washed into those same channels, leaving behind gold deposits in places where the current sharply bent. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. However, in my opinion, it needs to be tested. In particular, it would be good to analyze the bottom of the channels in KH mark for gold content, at least in the places where the current turns. There are, in fact, still a number of unanswered questions. For example, how did the Incas make such straight, multi-kilometer channels in stone, in granite? At the moment, not a single official scientist can answer this question, just as none of the alternative researchers can. I hope someday we will find this answer too.